today, before I can jump right into it, I need to give a little background. We're going to be looking at Hannah's prayer. But before I can do that, you need to know why it even matters and where it's at. So today's sermon, I got to kind of just give you a little background on that too. Pat Willis had bought a song that she wanted me to sing, and it's called Ancient Words. And it's very, very pretty, but it was right before we left Israel and then Easter, and it just didn't fit. So I thought, you know what, today's the day, and we're going to talk about Shilo, and it all fits. Did the whole sermon, the whole service around this one song. And then she texted me this week that she was going to be gone. But you're going to hear it anyway. But Shilo, maybe you've heard the word Shilo, but where is it and why do we even care? Well, there's a lot more things that happen in Shilo than you may realize. So that's the premise. Shilo, you have to realize that God had Moses build the tabernacle, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was, and they moved around for those 40 years. But then, after Joshua came into the Promised Land, they came to Shilo, and they built a permanent wall to put the tabernacle in. So God was not to wander anymore. It was still tabernacle. And then, several times a year, they would bring all 12 tribes to Shilo as one big family gathering, and that was the point. To have a big family reunion with the 12 tribes. And they would come and sacrifice and be in the presence of God. Now here's a really cool thing. As we get into, you're going to find out where the tabernacle was compared to where the tribes would camp out. But it's at this spot in Shilo that a man comes with his wife. And she is barren. Eli is the priest, if you remember him. And Hanna comes and she is pouring out her heart to God because she is barren. And she wants nothing more than to have a child, a son. And it's during this time of pouring out her heart that Eli tells her, God has heard your prayer. And next year at this time, you will have conceived and bore a son. She had made a deal with God that Eli didn't know. She said, God, if you give me a son, I will give him back to you. We're going to look into that a little bit later. When Samuel is born, does that name sound familiar? Hanna brings, after Samuel is a little older and he's weaned, she brings him to Eli at the tabernacle. And it is during this time that she reads, and she says her prayer that has been jotted down for all to read in 1 Samuel chapter 2. Then Hanna prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bows of the warrior are broken, but those who stumble are armed with strength. Those who were full hired themselves out for food, but those who are hungry no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and he raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and he lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. On them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful servants, but the wicked will be silenced in a place of darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven, and the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his Mishach, the anointed, the Messiah. Thus ends the reading. Thanks be to God. I will have, if you guys want to move over here, because there's going to be a lot of pictures and a video later that you're probably going to want to see. And you might not be able to see it over there. That last line, and I don't know if you've noticed a little bit through this whole thing, Hanna is actually prophesying when she's saying the prayer. Any of that sounded a little familiar? It's because you've heard these same words in Revelation. This is thousands of years before Jesus. And she is prophesying then the Meshach, the Messiah, the Anointed One. Actually, it was really cool when we got to go to Shilo. And I have to admit, I'd heard of Shilo, but I didn't really realize everything that had happened at Shilo. You know, some of these things, you know the stories, but you don't realize that that's where everything happened until you're there, standing in that spot. We got to go to Shilo. And I actually had the opportunity, they asked me to read Hannah's prayer. And that was really cool, standing in the spot that she probably had been standing in. And she poured out her heart not once, but twice. So the ancient word, this first picture right here, is actually a manuscript that was found, and there is a museum in Jerusalem. And it's called the Book, right? Museum of the Book. And it's got all sorts of fragments of different books of the Bible that have been found. And I think this was from Isaiah. It was one of the bigger ones that was found. The Word, from thousands of years to the cross. What does that have in common? How does East meets West? How many here ever watched that cooking show, East meets West? New meets old? That's what we're living in with the Bible. East does meet West, Jerusalem, America, and new to old to new. Well, this is what the tabernacle would have looked like. And as I said, it was at Shilo that they were no more wandering. God had a permanent place within the tent of the tabernacle. And so right here is where they would have sacrificed on the horns of the altar. And the priest would have gone in here. And in the front part is the first start that the priest had, the table of showbread, and then you have the table of incense. And then as they go behind this big curtain, which has the two cherubim on it, behind that curtain is the Holy of Holies. That is where the Ark of the Covenant, resided. Now God gave the Ark of the Covenant with Moses. And inside that ark was the 10 Commandments, both sets. The first set that he broke into pieces, and the second set that was given to the Israelites. This was the presence of God that resided there. So this tabernacle was about 2000 BC, and this was actually where they had proposed that that actual spot probably was on that site. It's hard to put into words. There are so many places where we went that I felt nothing. It was just kind of cold, and they said, oh, this happened, here and there and wherever. But there was two places, three, that I just felt electric. And as I said last week, it was at that tree in the parking lot where they believed that Jesus was crucified, and the tomb that they think they found that was Jesus' tomb, just right across the road and down the street, just a hair. And the other was at Shilo. I didn't even see this coming. But there was something about standing in that spot. You could feel it. It was just electric. It was like God's presence was still there. These are some of the ruins that were around that area. Of course, they had built up. It was a village at the time because Eli and the priests lived there. And as I said, you could see all these mountains that were around there. And this is what is so cool about this area. Because where God resided, the tabernacle, all the hills surrounded it. There was 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe had their hill. So when they came and they camped out, they each were able to be up here, and what did they look down on? But the tabernacle, the fire of the sacrifice, the presence of God. I want you to think about that for just a minute. All the other gods that people worshipped, you had to go up on a mountain to be with them. You had to build high places to them, and temples, And yet, where did our God reside? In the valley, where everyone could see. He is a God who has dwelt among us from the very beginning. He walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. He sat in the Holy of Holies amongst his people. These are just some more pictures of Shilo there. It's interesting how you have the barren rock and then you have all the green grass and vegetation and agriculture not too far away, just right there. This was exciting because they had just excavated this part of the site and they found these jars. Look at this. These are thousands of years old and they're still intact. Not cracked, not damaged, not broken. They dug them up out of the rock. I thought that was neat. This mosaic, too, our tour guide showed us. When you look at it, it's just kind of, it's dulled out. It's just there. But he said, I want you to see something. And he took his bottle of water and he poured it on there right here. And all of a sudden, the colors came to light as though it was brand new. And he said, you should be here when it rains. He said, this will knock your eyes out. This 1,500 years old, this was a visiting church in this spot. Now this is another interesting part right here. It's upside down, but I don't know if you can see it. It is actually the head of a cow. At the top you can kind of see the mouth and the nose, and then here's the horn, ears, eyes. What happened when Eli was the priest? He had sons, and God had told Eli that the priesthood would be with him and his family. But his sons were wicked. They were evil. They were doing unmentionable, unspeakable, unholy things. And God was so mad because Eli, it's bad enough they were doing that, but Eli wouldn't even correct them. He didn't punish them, he didn't admonish them, nothing. And so God tells him, he said, from this day, the priesthood will be ripped from your family, and your 2 sons will die on the same day. And that's exactly what happens. Now, Hanna had already brought Samuel to Eli at that time. But in that same day, the Philistines, that sounds familiar, Goliath, the Philistines come into Shilo, and they waged war and they killed both of Eli's sons at the same time. They stole the Ark of the Covenant and God's presence. And when Eli was told of this, he fell and hit his head and died that very moment. What I need to go back on just a hair was Samuel. Because I talked about this at Good Friday or Maundy, Thursday. There's something called the Pidyon, which is the redemptive price. See, every family who had their firstborn son had to go before the priest, and if they wanted to redeem their child back and keep them, they had to pay this redemptive price in silver. If they did not pay the price, then their child became the property of the priest and the priesthood. See, this is exactly what Hanna did. When she prayed that prayer and she told God, I will give my son back to you, she didn't pay the redemptive price. When the time came, she gave up her only son at that time to Eli to live and become, eventually, the next priest. When Jesus was born, we're talking old to new, when Jesus was born, his folks went to the temple and they paid the redemptive price to claim back Jesus. And he went home and he lived with them. If you remember, the night before he was betrayed, what happened with Judas? What deal did he make with the Pharisees? He said he would give up Jesus in exchange for what?
30 pieces of silver.
30 pieces of silver. And where did that silver come from? The temple treasury, the redemptive price. The Sanhedrin had to pay back that redemptive price of Jesus in order to claim him and own him as their own so they could crucify him. Without paying that, they didn't even realize this at the time. Without paying that, Jesus would have never been theirs. See how this goes all the way back from old to new? So here are the hills, the different ones that they would have camped out on in the area. And this is the breastplate. I had it at home and I forgot it and I was really upset. But you can see it in bigger picture here. The breastplate of Aaron, who was the first priest, each tribe had their own, of course, name, and they had their own animal symbol, and they had their own gemstone. These stones are also mentioned in another place in the Bible, in Revelation, within the city gates. Who here has ever read Ephesians 6 when it talks about the armor of God? The breastplate of righteousness is talking about this breastplate. It is the ephod, it is the breastplate that the priest would wear when he walked into the Holy of Holies before the presence of God as representative of all 12 tribes of God's chosen people. So in the beginning was the Word. Now we know that the Word is who? Jesus. Jesus was there at creation. Jesus was there walking in the garden. Jesus was there in the Ark of the Covenant, in the presence, the holy presence of the people. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. See, before the Word, Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. God met Abraham at Mount Tabor, a high and holy mountain that overlooks Samaria. And from that mountain, you can see Joseph's tomb, and you can see Jacob's well, where Jesus met the woman at the well, old and new. He spared Isaac on Mount Zion, which is now Jerusalem. Most people don't realize that. The actual place where Abraham was called to take Isaac was clear over at Jerusalem. Hence why the Temple Mount is on that spot after the temple was destroyed, because they believe that the rock that they have it over is the rock that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac on. I'll argue I'm not 100% sure that that's really the rock. But it's still in Jerusalem, on Mount Zion. God met and wrestled with Jacob, and we were there at Argumon. He met Moses on several mountains throughout that journey, and God's presence rested with the Ark of the Covenant, which resided, as I said, in the valley amongst the hills for all to see. We serve a God who is among his people. We serve a God who lowered himself from the throne room all the way for all to see, and a God who sent his own Son, who humbled himself to our level in the form of man, and he dwelt among us. Emmanuel. We serve a God who spared Abraham, who believed in the promise that a great nation would be made in and through him and his son. He kept him from doing that very sacrifice. But yet God did not stop. He did not spare his one and only begotten Son, the Holy Word, the ancient Word. Psalm says, the Word is a lamp unto our feet. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world, and a light unto our path. It is that Word, Jesus, who is guiding us through this world, throughout all of time and history. And if you were here for last week's sermon, we found as he walked on that road to Emmaus with the disciples, he was literally walking right beside them, even though they didn't know it. And he is walking right beside you every day of your life. That is the kind of God that we serve. That is the God that we fall down and worship. Holy, holy, holy. And that is the God that we also sing, Emmanuel, God with us. Amen. Holy ones, long preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world, whatever we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Holy words of faith handed down to the sage came to us through sacrifice. Oh, heed the faithful words of Christ. Holy words, long preserved for our walk in this world, they resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open arms. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. And all God's people said.